Today we're talking about what a model is in formal logic. Now, this is super important for specifically if you're trying to understand a lot of my videos because they have to do with the logical problem of the Trinity. And the logical problem of the Trinity is saying that there is no model that can express the set of statements that Trinitarians want to try to express. So it's crucial that your starting point, if you're trying to understand this stuff, is to try to understand what it means to model anything at all in logic. Specifically, we're talking about formal logic. So I'm not going to go through all of like the technical terms and whatnot. I'm going to try to break it down with an analogy. So think about it this way. Imagine me and you are trying to build something, and we're handed a box of tools, and we're handed a blueprint. Now the blueprint is what we need to build. We need to, from the box of tools, figure out how to create that blueprint in reality or whatnot. And the box of tools contains things like hammers, drills, measuring tape, and all the hundreds of tools that people use to build stuff. And those tools by themselves need a kind of interpretation, right? How to use them. And they also need an interpretation of which tools go together, right? Whether you can drill a nail, hammer a nail. I can't use a bucket to hammer a nail, right? So there's certain rules that go along with the tools. So it's not just the fact that there are tools that are in your box that you're allowed to use. There's a sort of fact of the matter of what you're allowed to do with them, and in relation to each other, what you're allowed to do with them. So why am I bringing up this construction analogy? Well, because this is how logic functions when you're trying to model. The tools themselves are what we call syntax in logic. It's basically like what you're allowed to write down, right? It doesn't give you interpretation yet, but it just tells you what we consider well-formed in logic, which is, am I allowed to write down, P conjunction G? Am I allowed to write P conjunction G? That's going to be ill-formed in logic. You're not allowed to write that. It's like having a tool in your box that you're not allowed to have in the construction example. Then you have interpretation, where it's you give meaning to those values, you give them assignments. And in the construction example, it's like each tool having its use and its limits in terms of what it can do and its relations with other tools. In the same way, when you give a certain interpretation, it tells you about the relations between those tools that you've had in your box. And now we're at the blueprint, right? The blueprint, we wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't a blueprint. And the blueprint in this analogy is the set of statements you're trying to model. So in the Trinity analogy here, we're trying to model statements like there is one God, there is three persons, the three persons are the one God, the three persons are co-equal, and so on and so forth. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take our tools to build something with that blueprint. We're trying to, in the case of logic, we're trying to build it into a formal system. In the case of construction, we're trying to build it into physical reality, right? Now think about what someone is saying now when they say it's illogical. The equivalent in the building example is they're saying it's unbuildable. It's not buildable given your tools. They're saying we have a certain program we run of rules and whatnot where you're allowed to use these tools. These tools have a certain interpretation, and they're saying if you are operating within that structure, to say something's unbuildable is to say that those tools fail to capture the blueprint into reality. It's not possible. That's what they're saying. They're saying there's not a single arrangement of those tools that you could use, you could put together in order to build the blueprint into reality. Now, it's very similar in the analogy with logic. When someone says that the Trinity is illogical, they're saying the blueprint, the set of statements, they're saying there is no arrangement of the tools you're allowed to use in the logical system to construct a model, to build it into the system with interpretation, with assigning interpretation of those values in the syntax. So that's what they're saying. They're saying there's not a single one. So what do we have to prove in order to disprove them? Well, we have to show, like in the construction example, is that there's at least one sort of arrangement of using the tools in the ways that the rules allow in the system to build whatever you're trying to build, a house or whatever. So in this example, all we need to show is that with the tools allowed in the logical system, we can build a model. And that would make it logical. Just like in the construction, that would make it buildable. So I hope that sort of clarified what's going on when we're talking about building models. And to say, again, to say that we've built a model is to say it's consistent, right? Or else there would be no model if it wasn't consistent. It's like saying in the construction analogy, if we built the house, we've built it following all of the rules, given the tools, the rules of the tools, and preserving the blueprint into reality. That would be the proper analogy in this case. So it's almost a perfect analogy in that case. So why do we build models then? Well, we build models, and this will differ depending on the logician, but you'll get a very, overwhelming answer to this, which is that we build models for, number one, clarity, and number two, consistency. We have a certain set of norms and logic, rules, that we think if we were to translate the set of statements, it should follow into proper reasoning, what we consider valid reasoning. And we're trying to check if the statements make sense when translated into the system, if it's logical. So we're trying to preserve consistency amongst the statements. So what does that mean then? Well, this directly relates to one of the objections that people bring up to the Trinity. And I'm sure a lot of you've heard people will say something like, you're counting inconsistently. Relative identity is ad hoc. They'll say something like that. But think about what they're saying then. There isn't just one way to build the house, right? According to the blueprint. You have a bunch of tools, and it's possible that maybe a drill doesn't get the job done, but a hammer does. But the hammer is allowed in the system, right? That's not ad hoc because you're switching from a drill to a hammer. That's the entire purpose of building, right? Similarly, in model theory, if some set of tools in the language doesn't allow you to build it into the formal language, we disband those specific tools, and we look for other tools in the language, like relative identity, for example, and we see if we can build it into the language, and for the case of the Trinity, we can with that. So that's not ad hoc, similarly to how in the construction example, it's not ad hoc to not use a drill where a drill doesn't work, right? We're just fulfilling the purpose of construction, just like we're fulfilling the purpose of modeling when we disband in something in the logical system, or not disband it, but don't use it. That doesn't mean we reject it, right? Because it's still allowed in the language. It's just not usable for constructing these specific statements, just like absolute identity, right? Think about this, when someone builds a certain model, even with absolute identity and not relative identity, there are other models that could reflect the statement. There are other ways of modeling the statement. They're not disbanding or just ad hoc choosing whatever. It's not ad hoc, I guess, is the point. Because what they're doing is trying to preserve the set of statements consistently. It's crucial that you understand what modeling is doing. Even if you don't understand all of the terms specifically as they're used in logic, you got to understand what people are trying to do. They're saying there's a bucket of stuff you're allowed to use, and they're saying if you can use this bucket of stuff with the rules attached to all the stuff inside to build whatever you're trying to build, then it's logical. That's what they're saying in logic.